what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, July 12th, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Quick little program reminder, on next Monday, Daniel Amaduri from Future Money Trends will be our third-hour guest. And we're working to get more guests here on the show, and better quality guests, and to keep you entertained and informed here. Now, obviously, the big news right now is Peter Strzok is testifying before the Joint House panel, and basically trying to say that having a political opinion doesn't mean that he's biased in his professional conduct. The Democrats are just trying to stall and pat it all over. And it's going back and forth. At one point, in his opening statement, Peter Strzok came out and said that his anti-Trump bias was actually an act of patriotism, and the Democrats just cheered at that. Yes, it's patriotic to oppose the President of the United States of America. So they're going back and forth. But a few little interesting tidbits have surfaced. I mean, Trey Gowdy is basically out there saying Strzok doesn't even think he's biased. And yet, when you read the texts, it's clear there was a tremendous animus there on an agent who was involved in two investigations with a direct bearing on Donald Trump, the Hillary email investigation and the Russia investigation. He should have been removed. And interestingly enough, Peter Strzok is out there saying that he was not removed from the Mueller team because of his bias. He was removed because of the public perception of the bias. So he wasn't really biased, but they thought it looked like he was, and therefore that's why they kicked him off the team. So it's just going back and forth, and he's still in front of the cameras here, and I'm looking at the closed captioning. Now, interestingly enough, Peter Strzok has admitted that his computer was the one that was used to change Hillary Clinton's crime from grossly negligent to extremely careless. No bias here. And this is really significant, because if you get into Title 18, there's a provision in there that says you can be prosecuted for being grossly negligent. So they took that wording out, knowing it would trip off people and say, well, there's the definition said, well, she was extremely careless, but Title 18 doesn't say extreme carelessness. There really is no difference between grossly negligent and extreme careless. They were nitpicking at words, trying to save Hillary Clinton here. Now, Peter Strzok has also acknowledged that the FBI let him decide what texts he thought were relevant to hand over to the Inspector General. So talk about, you know, the fox in the hen house. They were basically allowing Peter to aid in the investigation into Peter. Now, Lisa Page, of course, stood up her subpoena yesterday, and a lot of people are very angry. Goodlatte and Gowdy have given Lisa Page attorney 3 options to avoid contempt charges scheduled for tomorrow, Friday the 13th. And they're saying she can appear tomorrow, or she can present herself for a deposition tomorrow, or do both. But Lisa Page tried to explain away why she didn't show up by saying that the FBI refused to give her access to documents that she needed to present to the congressional investigators. And a lot of the congressional investigators are very furious about that. They're not buying it. So Lisa Page's attorney, Amy Jeffress, claimed that Lisa and I went to the FBI today to review the materials that were previously produced to Congress related to her proposed interview, but after waiting for more than 3 hours, we were not provided with any documents. So that's her excuse. The FBI ate her homework. Now, they've growing brouhaha over the nomination of Kavanaugh is starting to grow. And rather interestingly, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has asked the offices of all 93 U.S. attorneys to each provide up to 3 federal prosecutors to assist the Justice Department in reviewing government records of President Trump's Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. And even the New York Slimes is admitting this is an unusual insertion of politics into federal law enforcement. This is not normally done when there's a Supreme Court nomination. The Department of Justice doesn't launch a massive investigation of almost 300 prosecutors looking through every little piece of paper that they've got on him. And former law enforcement officials are saying this request is very, very troubling. He's launching another witch hunt, is what he's doing. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, Mark Short is leaving the Trump White House, and he's going to be taking a position at the Guidepost Strategies consulting firm as well as teaching at his alma mater, the University of Virginia. The timing is unfortunate, indeed almost suspect, because Mark Short was Trump's top Capitol Hill liaison and very key to marshaling Senate support to confirm the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. So the timing is indeed, as I said, unfortunate. Now, interestingly enough, Lanny Davis, the former special counsel to President Clinton, said Wednesday he would advise Hillary Clinton not to run in 2020 for her family's sake. And the article is out there saying speculation that she's mulling about throwing her hat into the ring. So Lanny went on to say she has so much to give in public service, and for her sake and her family's sake, she has so much to give in public service. I hope she doesn't put herself through it again. Now, Davis is currently a member of the legal team representing President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen. Now, this is very interesting. For her family's sake, has somebody decided to send a warning to Hillary Clinton? Because this Lanny Davis has to know Hillary's already made the decision. She probably made the decision right after she lost the election in 2016 that she was going to be back in 2020. Because we're already seeing the machinations needed for Hillary to basically rig the election again. The flood of illegal immigrants into our country, and the push to have them all registered to vote, the brown shirt tactics in the streets, terrorizing conservatives and Trump supporters, and of course the very liberal management of all corporate social media installing filters to block all conservative content whatsoever. I think all of this is connected to the fact that Hillary is in fact going to run again in 2020. Now, Maxine Waters is continuing with her diatribe and out there saying that Democrats should confront Republicans in public, Republican officials, Republican voters, and fell back on that idea that civility is part of white supremacism. That's it. That anybody who's calling for civility in the political actions out there in the streets, well, they're obviously white supremacists. They're being racist when they say, please don't beat up on people and scare the children. And a New York Times op-ed that declares that civility is the misguided obsession of white America. And according to a liberal down at CNN, not being harassed while you're having dinner is a form of privilege. So they're really ramping this up. They're not backing off. They're encouraging it. The corporate media is encouraging it, and that's why I think it's part of Hillary Clinton's strategy to come back in 2020. Now, Michael Moore went on Bill Maher's politically incorrect show, and literally the two of them were calling effectively for civil war. and they were out there mongering the fear as hard as they can and trying to get the brain-dead liberal millennials to hit the streets and cause mayhem. Go on out there and do your patriotic duty and cause chaos. So this is a full court press for violence in the streets of America. And I do think all of this is part of Hillary's grand strategy to get herself into that White House. So is Lanny Davis really unaware that Hillary has already made the decision? Or was that comment about, for the sake of her family, was he the one telegraphing a warning? Because we know there's a lot of people who don't want Hillary to run. I certainly don't. There's a lot of people in the Democratic leadership want her to go away. She has destroyed the brand. Right now over at Breitbart, their rap sheet of acts of violence and harassment against Trump supporters by liberals has now reached 305 incidents. And some of this stuff is getting childish. Remember George Lopez? He's a comedian. Was popular for a while, not so much. And maybe this was his desperate grasp to get back in the newspaper. But he basically went out on Donald Trump's Hollywood star and peed on it using fake pee. And liberals, of course, just thought it was wonderful. But it's not funny. It's actually childish. And that seems to be the group personality of liberalism, is just childishness. Tantrums, spoiled brat behavior. So, now, as we mentioned yesterday, there's a bill being introduced in the House called the Unmasking Antifa Act. And it's actually a revival of a law dating back to the mid-20th century that was aimed at the activities of the Ku Klux Klan, who, as you know, would wear these white outfits with the pointy little mask hats and everything and go on out and commit acts of mayhem. And so back then they had a law saying that if you were committing these acts while you were wearing a mask or disguise, they would add additional jail time on there. So they're updating it, and they're aiming it at Antifa, who are always masked when they go on out and cause property and physical damage. And of course, the alt-left is just melting down over this. You can't do this. We have a right to have masks on our face when we're breaking property and people. And actually, no, you don't. But they're very upset over it. They want to do what they want to do. And it's all brown shirt tactics. Even the brown shirts didn't wear masks. They didn't need to. They were protected here. All right, as you know, Donald Trump is over in Europe. He is meeting currently with NATO, getting ready for his meet with Theresa May, followed by his meeting with Vladimir Putin. And Trump is out there basically slamming NATO, saying that they all should be spending at least 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. And of course, it's implied that that money will all come to American weapons manufacturers, even though America's weapons are not very good and very expensive. And Trump is even saying it should even be 4%. Now, that is something that the European nations are not really willing to listen to. They're all struggling with their economies. They don't have the money to spend on the military. And I think, if I read this correctly, they're a little upset at the way Donald Trump is throwing his weight around as if he's the leader of the entire world, especially when everybody can see that the United States of America is a failing empire. All right, we're going to go to the phones now. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, Mike. If anybody who don't think Antifa's like the brown shirts, go on YouTube. Just watch the brown shirt. That was an army.
Yes.
An army an army to reckon with, Mike. I mean, you know, I hear some people saying, "Oh, we'll go through them. They'll quit." Not when you get shanked from behind. You know, these people are cultists. You know, I mean, they have like some kind of divine thing on their side, so they're dangerous. You don't turn
they're
your back on these
fanatics.
people.
They're absolute fanatics. They've been whipped up into a frenzy. They're absolutely convinced that all white people are evil, and they're going to ignite a real race war in this country. And they're going to provoke a backlash. Of course, they'll scream racism, racism when the backlash happens. But I think all of this is part of Hillary Clinton's strategy for 2020.
Well, Mike, you know who's the real, enemies, foreign and domestic? Is our own government.
Yes.
Maxine Waters and the like. They're the ones who are causing this divide, along with George. They're the real enemies. Do people realize these people are the ones causing the fracturing of our country? It's over here. I mean, it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. Because remember, Trump's got more years to go, and he's probably going to win again. I mean, we're in for a long haul. I mean, Mike, I'm telling you, I watched this NATO thing. Holy crap, Mike. Yeah, empires decline slowly and then quickly, and I'm seeing it before my eyes. I mean, you are. Holy crap. I mean,
yeah, well, I want to back up here to what you were saying about Trump winning again in 2020. He may not get there. I mean, even though Trump has been giving the deep state pretty much all it wants in terms of the wars and going after Iran, and Israel gets whatever it wants, they're still after him. Robert Mueller's still after him. Rod Rosenstein is still after him. And what I think is going on is, if you remember the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon's dirty trick squad, CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, and people like Donald Segretti, went out and sabotaged the campaigns of any Democrat who might actually pose a real challenge to Richard Nixon's reelection. And they basically engineered the Democratic primaries so that George McGovern won. And Richard Nixon was able to just steamroller over George McGovern. Now, I don't think Hillary wants to run against Donald Trump. She thought she had it in the bag in 2016. She doesn't want to even take the chance in 2020. She wants Donald Trump out and some little weakling, nobody knows who they are, Republican, handed the nomination so she can just roll right over them. That's what I think is going on. That's why I think they're still after Donald Trump.
And Mike, how many years do you think we got left? I mean, it can't be many, because we got to be in the final stage. I mean, at this point, remember you said the other day, Donald Tusk, he said, you better not alienate your allies. You don't have many. That's freaking true. We don't have any allies left because, we're a bully now. We've been a bully. Come on, man. War is a racket. We all know that. Smedley Butler, you talked about it before. We all know who calls in. We know it's a racket. But, oh, my God, I never seen anything like this, Mike, with the NATO thing and John Stoltenberg sitting there looking like a deer in the headlights. It's embarrassing. Yeah, it's just embarrassing now. We're a laughing stock. And flying Trump baby balloons all over England. They wanted to buy 2. How come England don't spend the money on the homeless population over there?
Yeah. Well, none of these nations are spending their money on the homeless populations. Token amounts, a little bit here and there in front of the media cameras, but all of our money is going to war. We're in a wartime economy, and we're driving the rest of the world into a wartime economy. That's what Trump is doing over there in NATO.
And Mike, I talked about the soybean yesterday. Do you know it dropped 50% since the price of soy? That's dirt cheap. My God.
Yes, it is.
Unintended consequences, Mike. It's hard. And Mike, I forgot to mention the other day that they said India is ready to surpass Britain. I think Britain's the 6th biggest economy in the world, and India is going to ready to surpass it. So things are changing. We all know that.
Yes.
Hope your listeners and you and everybody's ready for it. Because it can happen all of a sudden. When you wake up. Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go here. We got to do a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And getting on back to the Peter Strzok hearings. Apparently, Peter Strzok has refused to answer a question related to the Russian investigation, claiming the FBI's lawyers had instructed him not to. And this led to the committee's chairman, Bob Goodlatte, to threaten to hold Strzok in contempt. He's not allowed to refuse a question. The FBI's lawyers are not allowed to instruct him to refuse to answer a question. They're stonewalling and covering up yet again. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Steve Elkins, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm watching this too. It's nauseating. It's hard to stomach. But the only time I guess I'm ready for commercials is no commercials. It's continuous. Hey, on this investigation here, was Peter Strzok part of the FBI on this investigation with Hillary's email server? At the time, she was also given the instruction by the FBI to not touch the server, to not touch the emails, of which she decided to do otherwise. What she destroyed, 37,000 emails, had the hard drives scrubbed and then hammered. Was he part of that team at the time, or was that after?
I think it was after. I don't have a precise timeline on that. But again, the way that Hillary, remember when somebody asked her, did you wipe your server? And she said, like, with a dust cloth? You know, trying to pretend that she doesn't know enough about computers. But yeah, she deleted the 30,000 emails. They wiped the unused areas of the disk with bit bleach, which is a software tool that does that specifically. Here's the interesting thing. The NSA contacted the FBI. They contacted James Comey and said, we have those 30,000 emails. And Comey said, I'm not interested.
Amazing. Yeah, they have record of everything. They surely do. Hey, you know, when you talked about 2% of the gross domestic product for these countries that are in NATO to cough up, maybe up to 4% to fund NATO. You know, in his book, The Art of the Deal, the objective is actually in a deal is that everybody leaves the table feeling like they got something, like they got what they wanted when they came in. So everybody's kind of happy. And I have to agree with Dustin, is that, you know, yeah, this arrogance of the United States of America to say we are the rulers, we'll do whatever we want. You know, yeah, it's getting old, and relying on friends. Well, yes, our good friends Israel. But who else do we really have as a friend in the world? I mean, they fear us, but are they our foes and our friends? No. But, you know, like I said, the objective is everybody leaves the table feeling like they got what they wanted. And this beating your chest, this thumping, this arrogance is it's overwhelming. And I think it's going to play in a bad way. We're going to meet our demise someday.
Yeah, we're on our way. We're definitely already on our way. Anything else, Steve?
That's it. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate
All right,
it.
have yourself a good day. We're going to let you go. We've got another caller waiting on the line, but I'm going to wait until after the commercial break. Now, interestingly enough, despite all this talk about, you know, NATO good, NATO bad, the reality is the United States needs NATO, not for military defense, but as a cutout. Because NATO allows the United States to bypass the UN Security Council and engage in military adventures abroad while keeping a safe distance across the Atlantic. This is coming from Eric Volt of the Red Party of Norway. It's a very clever analysis. Because in all these adventures we've been seeing, whether it's Syria, Libya, and so forth, there's always a mention. There are always NATO troops involved. It's the coalition here. There's another analysis out here saying that the reason Trump is being tough on our NATO allies is because most of them backed Hillary Clinton in 2016. And so now he's going to get a little bit of payback. And that may be an issue as well. Raul Ilagar Meijer is saying NATO is basically a con game, and that it's like the military-industrial complex here in the U.S. It's just all about the money. Telling the people they're under threat from some enemy and saying, you've got to give us your money so that we can have nice weapons and airplanes and ribbons and medals and buttons and stuff and all that kind of good thing. Now, there's one rather interesting story that came out of Russia today where journalists at the NATO summit were talking to Donald Trump, And Donald Trump made the comment he thinks he could pull out of NATO without congressional approval. And according to Politico, Trump has warned his allies that they would need to radically increase defense spending or the U.S. will go do our own thing, meaning leave. Now, I have to be honest, I don't know if Trump is correct on this or not. I know that getting into a treaty requires ratification by the legislature, but we've seen presidents in the past just walk away from treaties all on their own. Bush walked away from the ABM treaty. They've walked away from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as far as Iran is concerned. And they certainly walked away from the Iran deal. All right, we're going to take another break here for commercials. Back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. What's on my mind is another broadcaster for RBN, I found out, is Dr. Jennifer Reynolds. I'm so sorry, Jennifer Daniels. Do you know her?
I know of her. I've never met her.
Okay, well, you need to, and we all do. And I stumbled onto her because she's doing interviews with different people. The first one I heard her was on Sarah Westall interview. And so then I started searching around for other interviews, and she's kind of on the interview circuit with other people. And she's one of these alternative medicine doctors that doesn't go along with American Medical Association practices. Mm-hmm. And when she was in practice in New York City, she was not towing the line, giving out prescriptions like she should, and the pharmaceutical company came to visit her, and hospital came to visit her, and she was in disfavor with the medical association. And soon she felt the heat and decided she should just get out of the States. And so now she's living in Panama. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know how she got to be a broadcaster also on RBN, but that's great. I never heard of her there. I only listened to you on RBN. But what she decided to do was to try to find the secret that slaves, the ancient slaves, medicine, because they were never sick. And in fact, the plantation owners went to them to say, I'm sick and what should I do? And so she went searching for this secret protocol that the slave grandmothers used to keep people healthy. And she found it. Or she found it. Yeah, she found it. And it would be great to have her on.
Well, I'll look into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I spoke to Mike he verified for me that she was just on one of her interviews. She spoke about that she was an RBN broadcaster. So that's, and just I'll repeat so people can look her up if they want to. Jennifer Daniels. Okay. She has a website, and do you want me to tell you what her secret protocol is?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
It's turpentine and sugar.
Oh, yes. Now I remember that one. And having grown up with turpentine as a fact of life in my childhood, I'm really not sure about that. I'd like to see some more verification on that one. I've heard this from a lot of different people, and I'm hesitant. I'm hesitant until there's a little bit more empirical evidence.
Well, one of the empirical evidence is that we've all heard of Merck, the pharmaceutical manufacturer, Merck.
Yes.
It's Merck Pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
Well, started putting out a publication in 1899 listing all the different diseases and what you could use to treat them. And in 1899, the first year that Merck did this publication, turpentine was listed as a treatment for every single thing. Well, since then, it's gone away, and, she speculates as to why this treatment was lost that the grandmothers were using. And in fact, if you go on her website and you get her free, there's a PDF download that you can print and read, and she tells all about it. And I read that today.
Okay.
And yes, I'm a believer. But,
well, you know me, I try and avoid belief, and I'm certainly willing to look into it. But let's just say I'm unconvinced at this point. But I'll tell you what I will do. I do have this copy of this herbalist medicine book, and I actually had a first edition, but I donated to a museum. I regretted that, and then somebody actually found a reprint of it and sent it to me. So that is in my bookcase. I'll take a flip through there later today and see if it mentions turpentine, okay?
Is it Merck?
No, it's not by Merck.
Oh. Okay.
Okay?
Okay, great.
All right, so bye-bye. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go.
I do have something about NATO also.
Oh, okay, go for it.
About 10 years ago, I was living in Italy, and one of my English students was an Italian naval officer. And he said something strange to me one time. We were talking about, politics and everything. And he said that he thought that the reason NATO was worth saving, now this is just his opinion, was because of not this North Atlantic Treaty. None of that was important. He said what's important is the organization. That it takes time to set up an organization. And he felt like that the effort that had been put into creating the organization itself was the valuable thing. That, for example, just got one idea in my head, was that something small like refueling an airplane in flight requires a little part, and if you destroy all of an organization, then you lose a lot is lost.
Well, I have a problem with that, and I'll explain why I have a problem with that. It can take a long time to set up an organization, that's true. That's not a reason to perpetuate it if the purpose for the organization no longer exists. It took a long time to set up the organization for the Apollo moon program. But after that final flight, there wasn't really a reason to keep that organization together because its purpose was no longer there. And a lot of people are questioning whether NATO really does have a purpose in the modern world or if it's an archaic holdover from the end of World War II.
Yes, well, I do too. I'm one of them. I was just throwing out what this naval officer said, and for your comment.
Okay. Well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Get on back to the news. Now, as you know, one of the ways the deep state are still trying to go after Donald Trump are with all these sexual allegations. And most recently, they've made a big deal about this former porn actress, Stormy Daniels. And she's now in trouble. She was up in Ohio dancing at a strip club at the Sirens Adult Entertainment Club on Cleveland Avenue in North Columbus, for those of you who feel like looking in with Google Earth. And apparently Daniels was dancing, and during her performance, she was basically using her breasts to smack patrons, and Daniels was fondling the breasts of the female patrons. Well, there's a problem. In most states, it is illegal for there to be any physical contact between the strippers and the customers outside of the tucking of currency into the G-string. And I'm sure that the liberals are going to be screaming that their star accuser against Trump was entrapped. But I think Stormy Daniels' 15 minutes of fame just dissolved. Now, the other one that's out here is that back in April, Daniels' lawyer, Michael Avenatti, was talking about how there'd been this story between a GOP donor who had a relationship with a Los Angeles woman, got her pregnant, made sure she had an abortion, and the deal included hush money that was paid across many, many months. And the next day it came on out that the people Avenatti were talking about were Shara Betchard, a Playboy playmate, who had an affair with the former Republican National Committee Deputy Finance Chairman Elliot Broidy. Now, creating a conspiracy out of the news where it wasn't there, Michael Avenatti later stated in an interview on MSNBC that Betchard possibly had the affair with somebody else, meaning Trump, and that Broidy was taking the fall for it. And again, Avenatti was just making things up, because as it turns out, from the Huffington Post of all places, Shara Betchard has never met or talked to Donald Trump at all, ever. But it's just another one of these, we're going to put out this shocking story. Oh, that evil Donald Trump, he was having an affair with a Playboy playmate, and it didn't happen. And I've been asking for months now why, when Donald Trump is giving the deep state pretty much everything they want in the wars, he's backed off any real serious investigation into the corruption. He's turned into their puppet, and still they're trying to get rid of him. And the only thing that makes sense is that Hillary is going to run in 2020. She does not want to run against Donald Trump. So, now looking toward the midterm elections, The Hill is reporting that according to the latest polls, moderate Democrats stand the best chance of winning in November. The wacko crazies like Maxine Waters may not make it. And their poll numbers are turning against them because of all this extreme violence that are out there. And the polls are also showing Democrats should not call for abolishing immigration and customs enforcement ahead of November. That is a vote loser. Now, Senator Dianne Feinstein is dealing with yet another scandal on her part. As you know, she was one of the people who was involved in Mark Zuckerberg's testimony to the Senate last April. And Feinstein failed to disclose her husband owns somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 worth of stock in Facebook. And Feinstein's excuse is, well, she doesn't discuss her husband's financial transactions with him. So she had no idea. Sure, Diane, sure. All right, let's turn on over to what's going on internationally here. And there was this exhibit titled Genocide in Srebrenica, 11 Lessons for the Future. And it opened in Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, after it was turned away from its original event location in Brussels by certain members of the European Parliament for displaying, quote, too many skulls and bones. Now, the exhibit organizer, Hikmet Karchik, an author and genocide researcher from Sarajevo, told Al Jazeera that he'd been in contact with a year from members of the European Parliament who had agreed to host his exhibit in Parliament commemorating the 23rd anniversary of the Srebrenica genocide. Probably somebody went up there and said, no, show the Holocaust. Don't show this. Put the Holocaust back up there here. Polls over in Germany, specifically one for the DPA news agency, shows German voters are basically fed up with the current level of spending on the military in their country. They don't want to go to 2%. They want spending cuts. And they're tired of the number of U.S. troops Germany is playing host to. And the poll is showing that even as officials fret Trump threatening to pull U.S. troops out of Germany, voters in Germany would welcome the U.S. departure. Basically, 1/3 of those polled were okay with U.S. soldiers staying. And there are currently 35,000 U.S. troops stationed in Germany. It's a lot of troops. It's a lot of money. Gee, I thought we won World War II and everything was hunky-dory, especially after the reunification. Apparently, the Germans are not just tired of foreign troops. The polls showed strong resistance to Chancellor Angela Merkel's call to spend 2% of Germany's GDP on the military. Only 15% of Germans support that idea. Okay, now, interesting little story. This is coming out of Press TV. A senior advisor to the leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Khamenei, says Tehran and Moscow need to bolster their strategic cooperation in the face of U.S. hegemony. And speaking to reporters on arrival in Moscow, Ali Akbar Velayati, sorry I butchered that, lauded Tehran-Moscow relations as strategic. In other words, the more the U.S. talks about sanctions against Iran, the more Iran turns to the Russian sphere of influence. Remember the other day there was somebody out there saying, Russia's trying to lure these people away from the Western sphere of influence. No. It's the Western sphere of influence that is driving countries away. So Iran and Russia are getting closer together, and Russia has already committed to Iran's defense if it is attacked. Over in Syria, the Syrian army retakes yet more villages in southern Syria, including the areas of Tafas, Yaduda, and Tal Ashari in the northwestern countryside of Daraa. And apparently militants there had surrendered, and units of the Russian military police were deployed in Tafas. So it's all but over there. Now, Israel claiming that Syria had sent a drone over the Golan. And it's not like Israel isn't sending their drones all over Syria, but claiming that this was retaliation for a Syrian drone, unarmed, didn't shoot anything, didn't bomb anything, was just taking a peek, if it was there at all. And Israel launched an attack on Syria's Quneitra province. And the we got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And people are already sending me information about turpentine, enough to get me curious. And so I will be giving it a good look-see. So we're talking about what's going on down in Quneitra in Syria. Israel claiming retaliation for what they say is a Syrian surveillance drone over the Golan, launched a major attack into Quneitra, and they fired several missiles in the direction of army positions. And basically Syria is saying that it didn't go all that well. Apparently F-16s of Israel fired a whole bunch of missiles, which apparently didn't do any harm. Nobody was killed, nobody was wounded on the Syria side, and Syria is claiming to have shot down one of Israel's planes. Okay. Alrighty, just taking a look at the message here. So, now then, over in Palestine, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs is keeping count, and they're saying Israeli authorities have demolished 197 Palestinian structures in the West Bank during the first half of 2018 as Israel continues with its land expropriation policies in the occupied territories. And the UN basically said that 8 homes, 10 livelihood-related structures, and 4 retaining walls were destroyed just last month. So they also demolished a residential apartment on punitive grounds. It was punishment for something, collective punishment probably, displacing 3 families. Israel has also demolished a Palestinian school near Hebron. And apparently the occupation forces have a new little trick that they like to do, because there is a process where they'll issue a demolition order, and then the people have a little bit of time to respond and argue why the property should not be demolished. But for some reason, that initial notification keeps arriving later and later. So they don't have enough time to appeal against the demolition orders. Israel has announced they're about to demolish 50 Arab homes around the city of Kalansawa under the pretext they were built without the necessary planning consents. Now, the reality is that in Israel, if you are not Jewish, getting a building permit of any kind is virtually impossible. And then Israel will use that as an excuse to demolish Palestinian properties, Arab properties here. Meanwhile, settlers once again have stormed Muslim sites in Nablus. They broke into the northern western village bank of Kurata, outside of Nablus, and held rituals, Jewish rituals, at holy Islamic sites. This is obviously a deliberate provocation. And eyewitnesses said the Israeli army cleared the way for the settlers to break into the village and cordoned off the holy sites so that the locals could not interfere. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on back to the news, we're talking about how the settlers are storming the Muslim sites in Nablus. This is something we're starting to see all over. Of course, we know about how the settlers have been going into the Al-Aqsa Mosque on an almost daily basis now. And ever since Netanyahu took back the rule banning members of the Knesset from going to Al-Aqsa, going to the Temple Mount, 3 have now visited under heavy guard. This is clearly Netanyahu's attempt to provoke a reaction, to trigger a new intifada that he could use to justify just uncorking all of Israel's military on the Palestinians. So Israel's culture minister, Miri Regev, wants to submit a cultural loyalty bill that would allow her to cut state funding to cultural institutions which violate the so-called Nakba law. Now, the Nakba law basically criminalizes the commemoration of the disaster, the tragedy. And obviously, the Nakba Day sits right on top of the celebration of Israel's birthday. And Israel wants a purely positive image on their birthday, and so they're punishing people who remember that Israel was built on land stolen from the Palestinians. Israel loves to use the law to basically silence things they don't want people to hear, like the Nakba law, like the Holocaust, and so forth and so on. And so Israel's culture minister wants the powers to punish the violators economically. Now, somebody started a rumor that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine was going to cut the salaries of the 22,000 employees they have in Gaza. That's a lot of employees. I mean, if you look about it, Gaza is about the size, roughly the size of Chicago. So 22,000 is a lot. But yesterday, the UN denied all these reports and said it was false, it was incorrect, more fake news. Now, you probably remember a while ago, back in 2016, there was this incident that was caught on video and outraged the world, where there was a Palestinian who was wounded and lying on the ground and not presenting a threat. And this IDF soldier just walked up and shot him in cold blood. And that was Elor Azaria. And he received a very light sentence. And when he was recently released, and when he returned to the scene of the crime, he was greeted like a conquering prince, a hero. You know, the Israelis love what he did. They think it was great. And again, I don't think they appreciate the optics, what it looks like to the rest of the world. Now, a lot of people are still talking about Jared Kushner's ultimate deal. This is a great deal. It's a wonderful deal. It's wonderful for Israel. But it's totally one-sided. It would strip the Palestinian people of their dignity. And basically what it comes down to is an offer of easing the suffering of the Palestinian people if they will stop demanding their right to return. To just give up any pretenses of justice and ownership of their land, even though the United Nations promised a right of return, even though Israel promised a right of return to become a member of the UN. Kushner's deal is forget all about that. You know, not going to happen. We'll bring you some jobs. We'll give you some money. And Israel says they'll let a little more food in if you'll just go for all of this. And to nobody's surprise, the Palestinians are not interested in that because they want their homes back. They want their traditional lands back. And they're very angry that bit by bit, Israel is chipping away at land that does not belong to them. And the world turns a blind eye, and the United States aids and abets. Now, here's an article. This is out of the Electronic Intifada, and basically says Israel right now has reached the point they want to break Gaza once and for all. To just absolutely trash it so that they're never going to come back and start asking for pesky things like decent food and water, medical care, or medical supplies. And Israel, like I said, there's clearly provocations with all these settlers going into all these Muslim sites. And it looks like there's a new intifada and a new war in the offering. And this could be the last one. And I think Israel's attitude, knowing that the Hasbara has failed, knowing that people are not believing that the world's sixth most powerful military nation is terrified of helium balloons set on fire, we may see Israel just go on into Gaza and literally scrub it on out, annex the West Bank, and just say, now, it's over and done with, go ahead and scream and shout because we don't care what you think. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. West Point graduate and author Major Danny Sherzian told Watching the Hawks that the war on terror is actually a battle for basic hegemony in the Middle East. You think? And saying it's going to go on indefinitely. It's a perpetual war. And that was certainly the agenda coming out of the Project for the New American Century, where they were talking about a century of unending war to bring the entire world under the domination of the United States, which meant under the domination of Israel. Now, Lockheed is doubling Patriot missile production. They're getting a lot of new orders coming in from all these areas where tensions are rising, and they're coming on out with an advanced capability, 3 missile segment enhancer, or the PAC-3 MSE, which has a larger dual pulse solid rocket motor and larger control fins that double the missile's reach and improve performance. So they're out there with a new improved Patriot, and they're all making money because that's what all this war is all about. Scaring ordinary people into surrendering their money so they can build weapons. Reminds me of a quote from George Bernard Shaw from his book Man and Superman, the chapter called Don Juan in Hell. There is nothing in man's industry but his greed and his sloth. His heart is in his weapons. And it does certainly seem to be true. I mean, we'll go on out to trade shows, and they're showing off, well, like cars and trucks, and, you know, and they're excited about what they're doing. But boy, you go to a military demonstration, air show, and the weapons on display, and you can just see how puffed up they are. It's like the energy is there, the adrenaline is there. Now, we haven't heard a lot about Yemen. For some reason, it has fallen off the corporate media schedule, if you will. The battle for Hodeidah is still raging on. Saudi Arabia has made gains up that coastline south of Hodeidah. And again, a humanitarian crisis, and you're not supposed to hear about it while we all fret about whether Donald Trump had sex with a playmate. But Saudi Arabia has issued a royal pardon for everything their soldiers have done in Yemen. And this was in response to criticism from the United Nations about some of the reported atrocities. And Saudi officials are saying, we're not doing anything wrong. But ultimately, they were able to get the UN to say that Saudi Arabia will be allowed to investigate its own forces and police themselves. And this pardon shows none of that is going to matter. Nothing will be done. The conquering hordes are immune. The Turkish foreign minister has just announced that Russia will deliver the first batch of S-400 anti-missile defense system batteries to Turkey in late 2019, and goes on to say that Western allies should not question Turkey's purchase of the Russian system. They simply went with the best weapon at the best price. But the United States and other NATO allies are saying they're concerned about the deal. They're concerned about the deal. Worries that the S-400 systems will detect NATO systems as a foe. Well, that's what IFF is for, identification friend or foe. Now, getting on back to our much beleaguered F-35, the Pentagon, specifically the Air Force, is getting ready to have a fly-off between the F-35 and an A-10 tank buster. And apparently a big selling point about the F-35 was its ability to support ground troops in realistic combat situations. So they're getting ready to have this fly-off, but already there are allegations that the tests are being rigged to make the F-35 look like it's doing a really good job. After all, the A-10 Thunderbolt is 40 years old, but it has been an amazingly effective aircraft. But there's already allegations that the tests are being manipulated to favor the F-35. And we've seen this before, and this goes all the way back to the Pentagon Wars, and I've talked about this before. It was a book and followed by a movie, and it's based on the true story of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. And this one officer who was trying to get the straight dope on just where this project was and where it was going, and after how much it had cost. So it's out there on the internet someplace, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's directed by Richard Benjamin. We have been talking about the poor quality of American weapons in general. There are all kinds of problems with the Gerald R. Ford, Independence-class littoral combat ships, Freedom-class littoral combat ships, and we were talking about how the Zumwalt stealth destroyer has drivetrain problems and is not all that stable in a heavy sea because of that inverted bow. Well, the second Zumwalt-class destroyer, the Michael Mansour, is going to have a main turbine engine replaced before the ship can sail to San Diego. And apparently the turbine blades were damaged during the sea trials. These things are fragile. Yeah, I mean, but it looks good, tied up to the docks. I mean, that's got to be worth something here. I remember years ago, as part of a charity thing, Claire and I got the super deluxe inside tour of the battleship Missouri, where we got to go way down below decks and see the combat areas and hold the triggers on the guns and all the rest of it. And it was very obvious that ship was built to take a beating. It was built on the assumption that it was going to have to be out at sea, away from where it could be repaired. It was going to have to survive a beating. In fact, for those of you who come to Hawaii and visit Pearl Harbor and visit the Missouri, on the starboard side, back about 2/3 from the bow to the stern, there is a very slight dent in the railing, the coaming there, which is where a kamikaze plane hit it. Now, fortunately, the bomb in the kamikaze plane didn't explode, but they slammed an entire plane into that ship, and it was a minor dent. Coat of fresh paint, no big deal. And as an historical footnote, the captain of the Missouri gave the pilot a proper military burial at sea. Brothers in arms, as it were. Over in Kuwait, the U.S. has been building a new military logistics hub, but basically a military warehouse, big box store. $32 million this cost. It's nearly finished, and apparently they're installing new communications cables and antenna systems. So when they say logistics, they're talking about communications. It's going to be basically a big telephone hub. And they're putting in these antenna systems that will enable both the U.S. and Kuwaiti Air Forces to operate out of Cargo City, which will be the main aerial debarkation point in the Middle East, the U.S. Air Force 386th Expeditionary Wing will be doing that. And so the U.S. is still putting bases all over the Middle East. So let's talk about the economic news here, because it's not all that good. We're looking at this coming trade war. And there's an interesting article that came out from Asia Times on how America's Achilles heel in a trade war is its consumption. And it's saying something that I said the other day, that as the tariffs start to hit and turn into noticeable price increases, consumer spending could crumple. We don't have the extra money to pay the cost of the tariffs. And we could see, I mean, the consumer economy is already overstressed. We've seen it with Retail Mageddon. You go down to the shopping malls, you see the retail vacancies. All the iconic retailers who've gone out of business, like Toys R Us. We just don't have that money. It's just not there. And I understand why Trump wanted to do the tariffs. I'm just not sure the timing was all that great. It all depends. What will make this work is if domestic American manufacturers operating right on our soil can get up to speed quickly enough to provide lower cost versions of the products that we need and get them into the stores, get them into that supply chain, then it will work. If they can't, and Americans are just paying that higher price for their goods because of the tariffs, it's going to slow down our consumer spending even more. People are going to start learning to do without. You'll see sales of these things really start to drop. The big box stores are already upset over all of this. Now, a lot of people are saying, if we're looking at a full-on trade war, what can happen? And there is concern that China is in a position to really go after U.S. tech firms, that China is capable of retaliating by simply deciding not to manufacture things anymore and succumb to the tariffs. Apple, in particular, is very vulnerable to China's retaliation, because Apple manufactures all of their computers, the iPhone, the iWatch, the iPad. They're all manufactured in China. And so this could get really, really ugly. And if there is something like an iPad or iPhone or iWatch that you have been wanting to buy, you need to get it now. We may be in a situation where certain imported products are not just more expensive, they're simply unavailable. So you need to think that through very, very carefully. Okay, we're coming up here on a commercial break, and we will be back after these few words from our sponsors. So stay tuned. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, Republic Broadcasting does need your help. It needs your support. It needs your love. And especially if Hillary is running again in 2020, it's going to be a long, long fight. And we need all the help we can get. There's no such thing as too small of a donation. So the postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to call in a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And I know you're tired of hearing me constantly out here doing the beg, and I have to be honest, I'm tired of having to do the beg. But it's necessary right now. So Republic Broadcasting needs you. Getting on back to the news here, there's another aspect to the trade war with China, and it has to do with the rare earth metals which have become indispensable to high-tech electronics, especially those used in the military. We're talking about minerals like dysprosium, europium, neodymium, lanthanum, and yttrium. And they have all these high-tech applications and a history of scarcity, except that China has a lot of them. And that if we get into a trade war, we could find American companies basically cut off because domestic supplies are nowhere near enough to keep things going here. Now, one of the reasons why this pending deal with North Korea would be a good idea is it turns out North Korea has a pretty sizable store of these rare earth minerals. And I think it would be a good idea to stop making stink face at North Korea, let the Koreas reunify, and just go on in there and make a deal with North Korea so that China is not able to weaponize their rare earth minerals. But hey, nobody in Washington, D.C. listens to me anyway. Bank of America is issuing a warning saying that if the U.S. gets its way with Iran, oil could spike to $120. Now, the U.S. is trying to get countries to stop buying Iranian oil, although Mike Pompeo is out there saying they may issue waivers to certain favored companies or nations. But they basically want to choke Iran off. They want to starve the people of Iran to the point of rebellion. That's what they're trying to get going here. But it means that there will be global shortages. Now, the United States has been bringing more of their oil and gas online. The U.S. itself is on the verge of being the largest oil producer on Earth. There have been some hiccups along the way, like the Gulf oil disaster and the fracking problems. So I don't think we have to worry about a domestic supply. But as scarcity goes up, demand goes up, the price goes up. we'll all pay it. Except China, yesterday we were talking about over in China, an independent Chinese refiner was saying he was going to stop importing oil from the United States and start importing Iranian crude, and as of today has started to do exactly that. So Iran has a customer for their oil, and the U.S. less so. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Kevin in Montana, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I've been listening to Stu
Minnesota, that was.
For quite a while. And he's always talking about Larry Mizell, who runs the Jewish mob out in Denver, and Norman Brownstein, the Bush family attorney and such, how he paid off, through Chubb Securities, Bill Clinton's payment to Paul Jones and such. I'm not hearing anyone at Republic Broadcasting talk about the Jewish mob out in Denver. Why is that?
Probably because none of us live in Denver. We're dealing with the immediate issues of the war, the politics and the corruption, and
Jewish mob owns the Bushes and Clintons. Rivero, get your fucking act together.
Okay, we're going to drop you here right now because we do not allow that language on there, and we're going to ban him as well. I have a real problem with people who come onto my show and think they have a right to decide what the show will be about. And I have another problem with people who come on in here pushing Jew this, Jew that, because that only allows our distractors to say, oh, they're anti-Semites, they're Jew haters over there. Yes, this guy may be over there in Denver, but there's been nothing newsworthy happen in Denver to justify paying attention to it at this moment. So we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we mentioned yesterday, Israel has been spraying agricultural land in Gaza with very powerful herbicides, supposedly for security, to basically kill all the vegetation so that the Israelis can keep watch on the Gazans. But this is where the Gazans get a lot of their food. And there may have been an economic motive there, because if the Gazans can't grow their own food, well, then they have to basically buy it from Israel. Well, that one has backfired because the Palestinian Ministry of Agriculture in the Gaza Strip has just announced it will stop importing Israeli fruits in response of the occupation's closure of the commercial crossing with the besieged enclave, along with Israel's use of herbicides along the border fence. So we've got to get some humanitarian aid in there. These people are being starved to death. It's the world's largest open-air prison. And nobody wants to do anything about it. There we are. Okay. Meanwhile, Trump is threatening sanctions on European investors in the Russian pipeline, the Nord Stream 2. Now, Russia wants to build the Nord Stream 2 to basically get oil and gas into Germany without going through Ukraine, at which point it can then shut the valve to Ukraine because Ukraine has been taking oil and gas and not paying for it. But as long as Europe was on the other side of that pipeline, Russia couldn't shut that valve. And so now Trump is out there saying that anybody who invests in the Nord Stream 2 will be hit with sanctions. Here a sanction, there a sanction, everywhere a sanction. And I'm sure people are getting pretty darn sick of that as well. Because if you think about those pipelines and their rights of way, those are major, major assets because they don't carry the oil and gas for free. There is a fee to be paid. And of course, where those pipelines begin and end is of strategic importance, very often military as well. So Trump is out there throwing his weight around. And let's see, I'm getting a headline here. Well, it's just Trump says he's declares victory at NATO, doesn't say what it is he's done here. So again, Trump is throwing his weight around and telling the European investors they are not allowed to do business with Russia. They're not allowed to invest in the Nord Stream 2. Turning over to the Brexit crisis, Theresa May has mere days to save herself and her version of the Brexit deal as a no-confidence vote looms. Tory Brexiteers now claim they have 48 fellow members of Parliament who are willing to submit letters to the chairman of the backbench committee, triggering a confidence vote. And Member of Parliament Andrew Bridgen said he was submitting his own letter of no confidence in Mrs. May to the committee. Now, the Prime Minister ordered her reshuffled cabinet to attend a second meeting at Newcastle as a way of uniting her ministers with Brexit talks due to enter a new critical phase. She's still pushing that Brexit plan that is just a total reconnection of Great Britain to Brussels. So she's trying to get that done and over with before she's kicked out of her job. Down in Australia, they have imposed new immigration rules, and it's had a positive result in that it is slashing migrant levels. And one of the immigration rules, and I think this is a good one, is the demand that the immigrants speak English, prove a stable work background. And it's bringing in immigration levels to well below the government set target, and it's bringing in a better class of immigrant. Now, the other day we were talking about how Iraqi rejected asylum seekers are being returned to Iraq. Iraq's not taking them. Well, again, migration, we're not getting the best people. Iraq doesn't want them back. Meanwhile, Trump has slashed refugee resettlement to the U.S. by 66% since the Obama administration. So it's starting to slow down here as well. That's a good sign. Over in Italy, because of their earlier totally open borders, they have had a gang problem show up. It's called the Black Axe. It's a Nigerian gang in Italy. These people are so violent. Even the Sicilian mafia has been forced to make a deal with them. And if you know anything about the Sicilian mafia, those are bad people. And so the Nigerian gangsters are challenging the Italian mafia in its home turf of Sicily. And the reason this gang appeared was decades of migration, where these gangsters slip into Italy illegally along with millions of Africans looking to better their lives. Nobody's doing any vetting. So you're getting Black Axe in Italy, you're getting MS-13 here in the United States of America. And it's all for this dream of a one world government, a new world order here. Alrighty, now over in California, there is a mayor who has come up with a way to fight violent crime. He's going to pay the violent criminals $1,000 per month so they won't get into trouble. He's basically saying as long as you stay out of trouble, you're going to get $1,000 a month. I think that's counterproductive. It doesn't guarantee they won't be committing crimes. They'll just work that much harder not to get caught. But that's a surrender. That's a surrender. It's basically saying the police aren't working, immigration isn't working, the country is really falling apart. Now, over at Ivanka and Jared's place in Washington, D.C., the neighbors got together. These are very wealthy, comfortable people, and they're out there outside the home. Tell daddy enough, screaming about the Trump administration's failure to reunite separated migrant families. They've got a cause, we've got a cause we can scream about, except that all of the eligible youngest children and families have been reunited. The big wrinkle is the DNA tests are showing that a lot of these kids are not, in fact, children of the adults claiming to be their parents. And you don't want to give the children back to these adults because they could be child abusers, kidnappers, murderers. You don't really know. All you know is they are not really the parents of these children. We talked about this briefly yesterday. And it looks like the misuse of children by the illegal immigrants is a far worse problem than anybody suspected, because it was just assumed these kids coming in with these adults were their children. And now we're finding out, no. Nearly half of the kids younger than 5 taken at the border turned out not to be the children of the adults they were with. So how big is the problem in this country? How many illegal immigrants are there? Well, according to this story that came out of the week, the estimate is now 11 million illegal immigrants in this country, living off of the social safety net, taking jobs that should go to legal American citizens, committing crimes, and of course, voting Democratic. 11 million Democratic voters is enough to steal an election. It was estimated that 3 million illegal immigrants voted in 2016. Now it's up to 11. And we still have 2.5 years to go. All right. If you've been watching the news or reading the news, you've probably noticed a very strange situation where the words populism and nationalism are being said like they're dirty words. Ooh, populism, nationalism. Oh, bad stuff, bad stuff. And political parties and governments, which are deemed to be illegitimate, are invariably labeled with the prefix populist. Trump's regime is populist. Italy's new government is populist. It's a way of implying that they're illegitimate. They are legitimate government. The message is going on out. Any government that is working to secure its borders, to take care of its own people, to prioritize its own people first and foremost, is somehow undesirable in the new order of things. And certainly for the globalists and George Soros, that's exactly what is going on here. They're trying to demonize this idea of love of one's country. It's kind of funny for Peter Strzok to sit up there in front of the Congress and say that his hatred of Trump was an expression of patriotism, when patriotism itself has become a dirty word to the globalists. You shouldn't be patriotic. You should be globalist. You should be wide thinking. Okay, so let's talk about some political correctness, because it is getting a little bit silly. Apparently, FIFA's head of sustainability and diversity, Federico Adici, has urged broadcasters for these last few games of the World Cup to show less cutaways of beautiful women in the stands, because we have to tackle sexism in football. I don't know about you. I like looking at beautiful women. I look at Claire all the time. But I mean, that's how silly and picky it's becoming. You can't look at the beautiful women. You can't look at the handsome men. What are you supposed to look at? Just look at somebody who's kind of like liberal. Nike, famous for the swoosh mark on its shoes, is the first major brand to come out selling a hijab for women. I'm surprised nobody is screaming about cultural appropriation on that one. But yeah, it's out there. Now, social media is up in arms when police were called on an 11-year-old boy delivering newspapers in Columbus, Ohio. And the 11-year-old boy was black. His mother encouraged him to get the paper route to earn additional money for his hobbies. And he went on out delivering the newspapers, realized some had been misdelivered, and went back to pick them up off the sidewalk. And somebody called the cops, and basically the mother is saying the cops profiled her 11-year-old son for delivering newspapers. It's amazing here. Now, back on July 4th, this is just now coming on out, where apparently Chicago cops were caught on video taunting black residents. And a video posted to Facebook has sparked an investigation into the cops' actions. And he was basically shouting at them, taunting at them, saying, "I kill," and I can't use the word that he used because of the FCC. But apparently, Chicago added more than 1,500 officers to their regular patrol for the holiday on July 4th when the video was shot. Now, there's something that you may not know about police departments. Because of the changing needs of manpower, many police departments have part-timers or reserve police officers. People who've been through the police training, but they go on to another job, but they're still available to be called back in case of an emergency. And I know because when I was in high school, one of my teachers was a reserve police officer. And I remember there were 2 days when class got canceled because he was called and had to put on his uniform. And I remember one time when I was out with my friends and we saw him in his uniform. Boy, talk about a shock. Talk about being out of context. All right, here's another story. Over in Pennsylvania, state troopers are in a bit of trouble. They were out there in the woods trying to find a marijuana patch, which they did find. Then they saw two people in a car who they assumed were connected to the marijuana patch. Now, one of them got out and surrendered to the cops. The other one took off, ran into the woods, at which point some brilliant individual got the idea of taking the bulldozer they had brought to destroy the marijuana patch and use it to basically chase down the suspect. And because of the density of the brush, he couldn't get out of the way. They ran over him and killed him. Now, this guy was unarmed, did not present a threat to the police, and they ran him over with a bulldozer. As you know, the gun grabbers have launched a campaign to try and undermine the idea that Americans are able to or should be able to defend themselves against crime. Now, we know the actual statistics. It's something like every year, 1.6 million crimes are thwarted in progress by American citizens with legally owned firearms. And I know I'm one of them. I went through that many years ago in North Hollywood. But they're trying to basically say it's a myth. There is no, the police solve all the crime. The police get all the crime. It's a myth that Americans defend themselves from crime. Well, there have been 3 counterexamples from this last week, and you've heard of them, but we're going to recap them again here for the benefit of all the gun grabbers who are dedicated to us being weak and helpless people in our own homes. Miranda Schaefer was the lady who saved her coworker, who was physically attacked by a customer at the George Webb restaurant in Milwaukee. And they were working, and this customer came on in and just physically attacked him. And Miranda pulled out the gun and drove him off. Then there was a woman in Jefferson County, Alabama, who defended herself against her estranged husband last week when he broke into the house and tried to assault her. And we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And we finishing up the story about women who defend themselves with guns. We have that story down in Dallas, Texas, where this mother went to the gas station, was paying for the gas, and a carjacker grabbed her car with her 2 kids inside. She was able to get back in on the passenger side, told him to stop. He wouldn't, so she shot him. All right, we're going to go to the phones now. Mateus in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
that's a pretty good example of protecting yourself with a gun. I just wanted to comment on the last few topics you were talking about.
Okay.
The $1,000, to stop being a violent criminal. I suppose that in order to qualify for that, you would have to first become a violent criminal. So if I applied for it, they'd be like, "Sorry, you're not violent enough." So,
all right. Well, I'll go on out and I'll knock over a trash can or something.
Yeah, it's actually, if you think of it, it's recruiting violent criminals, literally with financial incentive.
Yeah, it is.
Hey, when you're playing Monopoly, it's been a while, but you know how it goes at the end of a game of Monopoly, what it looks like. Now, it would be no fun if you had to, the next time you played Monopoly, you had to carry on where you left off last time. That would be no fun at all. It would just be one person, just with everything, and everyone else with nothing. But
yeah, you can't carry on from that. You have to restart the game. You'd have to have basically a jubilee is what happens when you play a new game of Monopoly. It's a jubilee. Everything is leveled out again.
Yeah, because nobody would want to play it, because it would be completely miserable having one tyrant that's just dictating everything and owns everything, and the rest of us just like late and for maybe going straight to jail and don't pass go even. So that's where we're at, is like a game of Monopoly that will never end. And
I see your point.
Your story about, yeah, it's a nice visual, isn't it? It sums the whole thing up in one visual.
Yeah, it really does.
Regarding your story just now about the children that are not DNA matching their supposed parents, it basically looks like, and I'm not joking, like, seriously, it looks like it's kind of like a kidnap a child visa program, basically. Like, I think that's actually what's happening. They know that they have a much higher chance of sympathy and getting into U.S. if they have a child.
Well, that's part of it. Some of these kids are being used as drug mules, but the real concern here, at least ought to be, how many of these kids are being made available for trafficking? How many are being sold to pedophiles? We now know it's a major problem in this country. It's a major sickness in this country, and there always needs to be a new supply of young kiddies.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Okay, and
the last thing.
Yeah.
About your hijab or hijab. If they were
Mateus, I'm going to put you on hold. Don't go away. We got to take our break for station identification, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to go back to Mateus in Canada. You had one more thing you wanted to share with us.
I just wanted to mention that regarding the hijab, or how do you say that, hijab?
Hijab, yeah.
All right. Okay, so regarding that, if that was something that was an expression of religious goodness of some sort, or was something that the women wanted, then it would be made out of white, flowing, cool gauze. But instead, it's made out of black polyester, which is more just a punishment. That's my opinion.
I didn't actually bother to take a look. I mean, I saw that it was black, and I saw it was branded Nike. I didn't bother to look at what it's made out of. But I think the traditional color for a hijab is, in fact, black. But as far as the material is concerned, you're right. They could have come up with something that was a little bit more comfortable. What's really going to be interesting, though, is to see how many of these things they actually sell.
Yeah, I'm complaining about them in general, not just this one in particular, but just the fact that they're obviously a form of abuse because they're hot. You don't need to be in a black bag in the desert. Like, if you really need this thing, if you really need to be in a bag for some religious reason, then why can't it be like a semi-transparent, breathable, light, silky, gauzy, beautiful thing? It's not. It's this horrible thing that the men are making and designing and planning. And
well, hang on a minute. You need to back up here a little bit. The reason the hijab is big and baggy is for the same reason that all Arabic traditional clothing is flowing and baggy, because regardless of the color, it's that dead airspace inside that acts as an insulation and actually keeps you cooler.
Okay, well, do you remember this picture when Iran was liberated from having to wear hijabs for a while?
Yes.
Do you remember this image of this woman on top of like a military jeep, and she throws off her black polyester crappy punishment bag, and underneath that is like Hawaiian fruit tropical clothing in a dress? Okay, that's what that woman wanted to wear. She didn't want to be stuck in a bag, in the black bag in the desert. She wants to be wearing tropical fruit. Okay.
Well, so, I understand that, but you do know that the hijab is only worn outdoors, and in their homes they can wear whatever they want.
As soon as the law changed, she threw it off outdoors.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. But before we start bashing on the hijab, it helps to have a little bit better understanding of where it came from, of what its religious significance is, and the fact that for a lot of women who've been raised that way, they're not comfortable being outside without the hijab. It should be a matter of personal choice. I agree. I disagree with the idea of mandating the wearing of a hijab. But again, there's a little more to it. It's not as simplistic as you think.
It's also serving the function to not have your wife being lusted after by other men that might be more inclined to rape her. I mean, there really is.
That's exactly the reason for it. That's exactly the reason for it.
Wow. You're going to put your woman in a rape prevention bag? Like, come on! Like, this is caveman. Like, welcome to the 21st century. Let's just be honest about it. The women don't need to be in black bags so they don't get raped by other men. There's other ways to stop them from getting raped.
Well, like I said, nobody's passed a law here in this country saying women have to buy this new Nike product. And personally, I don't think it's going to sell all that well.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, Michael. I'm kind of mad at you. I'm not mad at you, of course. I'm mad at the hijab. Anyways, thank you very much. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And, you know, these things are matters of fashion. And it's easy to sit in one culture in one country and demonize what is going on in another culture in another country. But you need to realize they're probably looking back at us and they're outraged by, well, like bikinis, for example. So a little more tolerance, I think. You know, we ought to show tolerance for other people's ways. We must first respect our own. First and foremost, but let's be tolerant and let's be a little more understanding before we're so quick to condemn. All right, back to the phones. Francis in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, aloha to you both, young man.
Thank you.
I originally called about one aspect, but when you mentioned about the women's garments in another country and so forth, I have to make a little confession about that. Actually, having talked to a young lady of a couple that was dressed in such a fashion where the only thing you saw was the area around her eyes, and that was it, nothing more except for her hands. And I was intrigued by the outfit, and I had to ask her what was the purpose behind that, if it was something she willingly did or it was something that was required because of the culture or who knows what. And interestingly enough, it was, even though there may be a requirement in the culture due to ethnicity or whatever have you, but I kind of find out from her is that she finds it to be a lot more safer to have the garment on that she uses, because that way she doesn't have, I guess you could say, leering eyes looking over what she's got on or what she looks like and so forth and so on. So she looks at her attire as a type of protection from unwanted attention, unneeded attention, and so forth. So she can go about her life and do what she needs to do as far as the family goes. So that's just my 2 cents on that deal.
Okay.
Of course, I think they should change the coloration, though, every once in a while or whatever, and not be totally black. But, you know,
I would agree with you on that one as well. I think it should be a more reflective color.
Yeah, you think? But anyway, as to another aspect that you mentioned earlier about Gaza being a huge open-air prison, I have to disagree with you, my dear. That is not the only open-air prison in the world. There's only one other one I can think of that's a lot bigger than that. You know where that is?
Nope. Tell me.
Here in the U.S.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that. But by the way, just to be clear here, I didn't say Gaza was the only giant open-air prison. I just said it was a giant open-air prison, which it is.
Oh.
I mean, they're completely fenced in. They're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to come and go. Egypt, is cooperating with Israel in just keeping them hemmed in. Over at the fence, it's turning into basically a free fire kill zone.
It's crazy. Well, if anything, I apologize because I came in on the end of the commentary about that, and I thought, wait a minute, where's he going? So anyway, but yeah, that is totally absurd. And quite frankly, if they talk about human rights and so forth, you know what? When you got people walking around and they're being shot at from another line in the country boundary or whatever by other people that are supposedly humanitarian. Excuse me, what part of firing a firearm at someone and hitting them is humanitarian? What kind of religion advocates that? Because if I find out what it is, I sure as heck don't want to even have anything to do with it because, quite frankly, it's hypocritical and, well, don't get me started, but you already did. Anyway, with that being said, I'm out of here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. The phones are open again, 800-313-9443. Getting on back to political correctness, you are not going to believe this next story. Apparently, pedophiles are trying to become part of the LGBTQ plus community, even going so far as to make a pride flag for Gay Pride Month. And they're describing themselves as MAPs, meaning minor attracted persons, and they want inclusion in the LGBTQ movement. And their position is basically saying that pedophiles are misunderstood, marginalized people, and that as long as their attraction to children is not acted upon, or in some cases when they get permission from the child, they should not be villainized. Well, that first part I can go along with. That if they have certain urgings and they don't act on them, that's cool, because who knows what urgings we've had in our lives that we know we shouldn't act on them. It is our actions, not what is in our minds, by which we should be judged. That second part about getting permission from the child, I don't think so. Because you're talking about children who are too young to even know what you are talking about. Now, as far as all of this other aspect is concerned, I mean, what a transition we have seen. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, the idea of a guy dressing up as a woman, they were ostracized. They were seen as mentally ill. Remember the original TV show MASH, and the character of Klinger, who was always walking around dressed as a woman, but he was trying to get a Section 8 out of the Army by demonstrating he was mentally ill. That was the original image. And instead today we have pride parades on the streets. And that's okay. You know, they want acceptance. That's just fine. But I think this is going to damage the brand. I think this is going to damage the brand. And no, I'm not willing to accept pedophiles who act on those impulses. I'm an easygoing guy. I was a wild child myself many years ago. But when children are involved, I have some very primitive, primal instincts that kick in. And so I find this story shocking, absolutely shocking. Okay, now, YouTube TV was basically selling subscribers a $40 a month service, promising they would not miss a minute of the World Cup game. And apparently, YouTube TV crashed during the England World Cup game, which angered really a lot of people. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Keith in Montana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, two things, Mike. I was going to call earlier when your other caller had called in, and you're kind of upset about which I don't blame you. One, the only reason I worry about the apparel that is used today is because of the mass stereotyping that is so predominant nowadays. But in lieu of that, though, I don't know if you realize the trends, but, and this isn't to pick on Jews, I just want to highlight that, but the fact that over in Miramar, Israel is selling the arms for that. And years ago, I used to correspond with Noam Chomsky. And Noam told me at the time there that the Guatemalan and Rwanda genocides were also via Israeli arms. But the main importance of this, though, is that if you look at Ukraine right now, Ukraine, where the rise of anti-Semitism, and then, of course, the rabbis telling those Russian Jews to immigrate to Israel, where it's safer. Then we have the same thing in Europe, where the rabbis are telling the Jews to immigrate to Israel, where it's safer. And I believe this is just a massive thing to promote fear, to get the Jews to move to where they want them to move.
Yeah, well, because Israel is afraid of the demographic realities in that the Jewish population just isn't into having that many kids in contrast with the Palestinians and the Arabs.
Right. Right. And so, like I say, a guy can split nails, do whatever you want like that, but we're down to the same scenario here, to the fact that people are being driven. You don't leave perfectly good dry land to die in a boat because the land is bad. They're being driven out.
Yes.
So anyway, I just want to highlight that. Anyway, good show, okay?
Yeah, well, I mean, most of the refugees coming into Europe are being described as fleeing war zones. Some are. Many are economic migrants. They think the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. All right, thanks an awful lot, Keith. We're going to let you go and switch over to Cameron in Great Britain. Aloha, Cameron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. It's been a long time. Mike, couple of things. First of all, about this hijab business. I actually made the same mistake as your caller, thinking that it is a religious culture. It's not. It's an Arabic culture mixed into religious culture. Pretty much like Christianity, which has a lot of Catholicism. It has got a lot of mixed culture with Romans. And the second thing was, I'm going to take issue about something that you said about pedophiles, that if they don't act on it, it's acceptable. It's not, because, you see, if somebody is sort of sexually, how should I put it, curious, if you like, they can go to porn sites on the internet. If somebody is a pedophile, is socially, sexually, desires to see images, they have to see images. And those images are going to be of children. And
you're talking about somebody who is now acting on the impulse. And I was trying to basically set a line saying that somebody who has that nature in them but does not act on it, I don't think they should be punished or demonized. But if you're saying they're going on the internet to actively look for this kind of child pornography, well, then they're acting on the impulse and they've crossed over to the other side of the line where, yes, I think something has to be done because it shows they're losing control.
Sorry, I must have misunderstood you because I thought that you meant that if actually actively acting on it in a sort of a...
I think going on the computer and searching down child pornography is acting on the impulse. And maybe I should have been clearer in saying that I'm not just talking about actually going after a child, but anything that's engaged in that area. But again, it shows just how far our country has declined where this sort of stuff is now basically treated like this is the new normal. And it isn't. We're kind of reliving Rome during the time of Caligula, when they had horses as senators, and all kinds of just insane craziness as the empire edged toward collapse.
I absolutely agree with you, Michael, and thank you very much for the show. Have a wonderful afternoon.
All right, thank you very much for the call. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, getting onto the health issues here, and yes, I am going to take a good look at that turpentine thing because somebody sent me an article which I read on the commercial break, and it actually does seem to make a little bit of sense. There is this article where there's a new study that proves the FDA is actively suppressing information about the harmful effects of Gardasil. Now, this study was published in the Journal of Toxicology and Environmental Health, and it analyzed data on pregnancy outcomes, comparing women who received an HPV vaccine with those who did not. And the data analysis is titled, A Lowered Probability of Pregnancy in Females in the USA, age 25, who received a human papillomavirus vaccine injection. And this study, which was thankfully uninfluenced by pharmaceutical money, analyzed data on 8 million women living in the U.S. from 2007 to 2014. And basically, the study says that having that vaccine has a negative influence on fertility. In other words, if you have had this vaccine, you are less likely to be able to conceive. Now, you combine this with the story that we had yesterday, where there's a study showing that women who are being given Gardasil are actually coming down with HPV more than women who don't have the vaccine. So here we have a vaccine that doesn't work and is actually harmful. But by golly, they're going to fast track it into the next market niche that they can because it's all about the money. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome to the show. And I'm getting all kinds of emails about this issue of the hijab. One of them says, before the USA invaded Iraq the second time, women in Baghdad didn't even wear veils. It was a secular Ba'athist democracy. Leave it to our Canadian friends to actually believe completely staged videos about the liberation of Iraq, including women burning their hijabs and crowds tearing down the statues and so forth and so on. So there's one aspect. This one, though, is a little bit more interesting. This is coming from a website that actually talks about Islam. The hijabs do not have to be black. They can be any color except for the colors that are reserved to men, which I presume is white. But apparently they can be any color as long as they are not themselves decorated to draw the gaze of men. So that's where we are on that. Okay, as you know, there is an Ebola outbreak in the Central African Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they've hit a major hurdle to their work because the people in the Congo, the people coming down with the Ebola, they're convinced the disease is actually a witch doctor's curse, the work of evil spirits. And according to a report in Agent Fresh France, many Africans, as a result, are refusing conventional medical care and are instead turning to preachers and prayers to chase away the threat. And last Wednesday, apparently the pastor of a local evangelical church died several days after he prayed for an Ebola victim who went to him for help. Now, at this point, they're still not sure how Ebola gets from point A to point B. They're thinking it may be bats, and they're starting to track them. All right, back to the phones here. Shem in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
This is Sherry. Do you remember me, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Oh, Sherry. I'm sorry. My eyes are getting bad. Okay. Yes, Sherry.
No, that's all right. I'm glad you're back because you disappeared from the airwaves and now you're back. So I noticed some things and jotted them down. You're talking about these strange things that people are expecting us to believe. They want to change our reality. Of course, we know that, and
Yes.
we already know what they don't want, what the social engineers don't want us to know. And that is that we have these limitless minds. And I really noticed this on the show yesterday. The audio faded to where it was almost off the air at certain key things you brought up. Like, they do this on TV too. All of a sudden it blanks out like they're editing.
Is this on the YouTube feed?
This is, no, I don't do all that. I just listen to you on the radio, plain old digital radio.
Okay.
And I was listening to you saying, oh, they're back, and all of them are back. I still just get an hour, but I don't care. It's better than nothing. Audio faded on the air when you mentioned ransomware. And so I couldn't hear all that was said about that. And then it also faded when you talked about the Twitter accounts. See, these are sensitive things they don't want us to know about. And then you were talking about the laws of relativity. Of course, that's the stuff I'm interested in. And this is where we have already it has been proved that we have this limitless mind, and so they're not going to succeed in trying to be more powerful than we through artificial intelligence or anything else. But here was a hard to hear section that kind of digitally fragmented out when you were talking about vaccines and someone had banned the sales of MMHR because it gave hemophiliacs AIDS. That
happened down in Samoa. There were these two tiny babies who died literally an hour after getting the MMR vaccine, and so the government halted all vaccinations and basically has confiscated the vaccine supply.
That's good. These are the things that you couldn't catch. That was all edited out from your show the other day. Those things. So the ransomware,
all right,
the
well,
Twitter.
let me ask you a question here because I'm getting this from our control room technician here. When you said you were using a digital radio, are you listening to a micro broadcaster or are you coming in over the internet somehow to RBN?
First of all, I'm not online, and I've always gotten 104.9, and it was off the air. There wasn't anything there, and then it showed up one day.
Okay, so they're carrying my show. Okay.
They're carrying 104.9, yeah, the one that I think is down somewhere by the coast or something. I don't know where it comes out of, Corpus Christi or something, but I'm getting your show again, and I was going to find out if I never went online to see if I could get something through a shortwave radio or something like that.
We don't broadcast on shortwave, unfortunately.
Okay, well, as long as I can hear a little bit here, I really miss your complete news, because I don't feel like I have a grip on everything because I miss so much, but maybe something will maybe I'll take on an extra, maybe I'll get a phone that has unlimited calling. I'm kind of looking into that, and you have a call line, don't you?
We have a listen live line, and of course, if you have a smartphone, you can tune in with an ordinary web browser or some of these online radio apps, these tuners. Anyway, listen, Sherry, we've got to let you go. We've got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones to Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Just to address how to listen to RBN, I just want to throw that out there real quick. That I discovered RBN through using a Wi-Fi radio, and they're out there now, and they're awesome. Not to really say anyone's better than the other, but I have a Grace Digital Wi-Fi tuner and a small radio, and I don't fire my computer up to listen to the show. So that is an alternative for other people who want to listen to the show each and every day and program your stations that you like, either music or talk radio. So think about Grace Digital Wi-Fi radios or just a Wi-Fi radio in general.
Yeah, that's definitely a way to go. I mean, it doesn't make sense burning up an entire computer just to listen to the radio, so it's definitely an alternative way to go. I got an email from somebody here reminding us all that you can listen to RBN on the Galaxy 19 satellite. Now, it costs a couple of $100 for the equipment. but you can then find an installer online to get it put on in, if you've got the room for it. Some places you're not allowed to have that. Where we live, we're not allowed to have any satellite dishes. Otherwise, we'd be signed up for DirecTV, and we'd tell our current Spectrum to take a
ballpark price for the radio I have, I'm going to say $135 to $150, and you can program it for all your favorite talk radio or favorite music. And when I turn it on, it buffers and it goes to the show probably in less than 15 seconds.
Well, that sounds really good.
I take my computer for computer work, and I just use the radio for listening to talk radio.
Okay, well, thanks an awful lot.
Got it. Thanks, Mike. Bye.
All right, we're going to let you go here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So how did we get into this mess where we have pharmaceutical corporations who are selling vaccines that are harmful, fatal, if you remember that story out of Samoa? They're not really making people better. I mean, we've seen all these times where the news will come out, oh, there's a mumps outbreak. There's a mumps outbreak. Get your vaccination. Get your vaccination. Or there's a measles outbreak. And then you find out the people who came down sick with the mumps and measles all had the vaccination, which means either the vaccine didn't work, best case, or worst case, it's actually causing the illness, which is what that study about Gardasil that we reported on yesterday was about. So how did we get into this situation where this is supposed to be acceptable? Well, it all goes back to the Homeland Security Act, which contained in it a provision to indemnify vaccine manufacturers from civil litigation resulting from harm caused by their products, under the theory that in the event of a terrorist biological attack, the vaccine companies had to be free to fast-track vaccines out there, unconcerned about whether they were making mistakes that could kill people. That was the rationale we were given. But, of course, this immediately disincentivized the idea of any kind of quality in the pharmaceutical industry, just like indemnifying computers all the way back in the 1970s has led to bloated software and faulty hardware. They suffer no harm from bad products. So that's where it all really started. And then there's the vaccine court, which usually rules that the vaccine didn't cause any harm. But occasionally they do. Occasionally it's just too obvious to ignore. And they've paid out a lot of money very quietly. You never hear about this on the corporate media. The other reason that we have this issue, of course, is the CDC, which is always out there saying, this vaccine is safe, this vaccine is wonderful, this vaccine is good for you, love your vaccines. But right now, we're starting to hear more and more from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and it turns out the CDC owns 57 patents for vaccines. It's about 20 more than I was aware of. It's not a government agency. It is a privately owned for-profit company that is basically a subsidiary of big pharmaceuticals. The CDC Corporation makes over $4 billion a year and is run by big pharma executives. This is a scam. CDC is just there to convince you that the medications are safe because big pharma knows, no, they aren't safe. So we've got to come up with a front that says, yes, this is good for you. And so we wind up with vaccines that are giving people diseases like HPV, reducing their ability to conceive. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. Bill Gates is always a champion of reducing population using vaccines. So one of the things that we need to do when the crash is over and we're restarting the nation is that we bring back the idea of product liability. That if you put out a product that doesn't work, or even worse, causes harm, that you can be sued. We have to make the corporations understand that their way to profit lies through making good quality products, not just getting some piece of junk out there and then hiding behind the government when it all goes south. All right, NASA is trying to come up with a backup plan to get American astronauts to the International Space Station because of increasing reports of delays to the Boeing and SpaceX manned capsule systems. And there was an original timeline, which anybody who's worked in space development knows you shouldn't lean on. And the U.S. is already talking about ending its relationship with Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, to get piggyback rides up to the space station as part of this sneering at each other. And so now it looks like we're coming up on a situation where NASA's going to have to come up with another way to get our astronauts back up into space because of the additional delays on the horizon for these new commercial crew capsules. And both companies are aiming for test flights by the end of this year. But the Government Accountability Office is saying further delays are likely. And if the postponements keep mounting, the GAO fears there could be a gap in U.S. access to the space station. Now, I love this next story because I get a nice little I told you so out of it. As you know, Curiosity is on Mars, and they're looking around and they're starting to say, ooh, we're finding organics. Mars may have once had life. They found organics. And, of course, as you know, because I've had Dr. Gilbert Levin on this show before, the Vikings indicated life was there. Actual living life, not past life, but actual living life on Mars back in 1976. And NASA decided to say, no, they didn't, because of an experiment called the Gas Chromatograph Mass Spectrometer, the GCMS. And it returned a negative result. It didn't find any organics at all. And so NASA went with the negative, and that was the end of it. And as a result, NASA has not sterilized any further probes to the Martian surface, which means it's going to be a little bit trickier making sure that any life that is found on Mars is actually indigenous and not something that was transplanted. But here's what's going on. There's this new paper that's come on out where scientists are looking at the data, and they're looking for evidence of chemical called chlorobenzene. And they've found it in some soil samples. It's a compound only produced when carbon molecules burn with perchlorate, which we now know is in the Martian soil. So scientists have gone back to look at the original GCMS data on Viking, and they found evidence that it was detecting chlorobenzene. In other words, it did, as I put out in my little paper, it was sucking up organic molecules but destroying them before they could be detected. So I'm feeling a little perky about that one. And we're going to try and get Dr. Levin back on the show. And I noticed in both of the articles that I linked to about this story, and they talk about the GCMS, you know, the molecules could be there. Not one mention of Dr. Levin's label-released experiment. And to recap on that one, Dr. Levin basically adapted a well-used, well-established system for testing civic water systems for biological contamination. And it was simply taking a sample of water, or in the case of Mars, dirt, and tossing it into a nutrient solution that was tagged with radioactive carbon. Then you just sit back and you wait for the microbes to do what microbes will do, metabolize, and basically produce metabolic byproducts, which would float to the top of the test chamber and be detected by a radiation detector. And it's a proven technology here on Earth, and we sent it to Mars on the Viking, and it returned a positive result. It returned exactly the result that was expected by Dr. Levin. And it's rather angering to look back all those years ago at how, following the GCMS results, how hard JPL really worked to discredit the positive from the labeled release experiment. They didn't want to just say, we've got one positive and one negative. You know, they wanted to be able to say, there's no life on Mars, we've got this result from the GCMS, and what we thought we saw in the labeled release experiment was something else entirely. So there was actually a lot of pressure on the mission, on NASA as a whole, not to say there was life on Mars, mostly coming from the Bible bangers. We were getting calls from members of Congress saying, you know, you can't say that there's life on Mars. My constituency don't believe in life on Mars. They believe that this is the only planet with life and that God sits up nights to admire them. And if you break their illusion and say there's life on Mars, well, we're going to have to cut your funding. And so NASA's management, the new NASA management, not the same people who blazed the trail into space back in the 60s, but the new NASA management basically knuckled under and said, yeah, okay, we'll go along with that. And there may have been a larger agenda at work because, again, in the article that I wrote on this subject, I pointed out that confirmation of life out in space, even our next door neighbor Mars, is going to be a socially transformative event. And we humans might just decide to put down our weapons and join together to just see who else is out there. And of course, that would be a tremendous loss for rulers who live on war, the military-industrial complex, the conquerors, the people who want to go down in history for having the most blood-stained hands. When Marco Polo came back from Asia, he was tossed into prison by the Dominicans, and one of the reasons they threw him in jail, they didn't want word getting out to the general population that there was an advanced civilization out to the east that had never even heard of Jesus, which was a threat to the church's power. But eventually, of course, word did get out. Marco Polo was eventually let go. The popes carved up Asia between Spain and Portugal. That was Pope Alexander VI, and they were off and running. Now, as you know, Monsanto is facing a major lawsuit right now. And the first one is going to court. The judge said, yeah, the evidence is compelling enough to say that this exposure to glyphosate is linked to this person's cancer. There are now 5,000 lawsuits lined up behind this one that are all proceeding to trial. Now, the lawyer for the plaintiff in this first case on Monday was saying that Monsanto hid the cancer-causing effects of their weed killer. They knew it was there, and they bullied scientists into making claims it was safe. And Monsanto has gone out of its way to basically fight any independent researchers on this subject. Don't forget what happened to that French study. The study in France, it was a rat study. Monsanto had a rat study that they terminated at 3 months. The French study let the rats live their entire lifespan and discovered that at 4 months is when the medical problems began to show up. Huge tumors, all kinds of changes to internal organs, loss of reproductive ability, shortened lifespan. And Monsanto literally went after the journal that published the article, got them to retract it, mounted a major media campaign saying, no, 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 glyphosate is safe. They even had people going around saying it's as safe to drink as water. And there was this one time where one of these Monsanto salesmen was handed a glass of glyphosate, said, okay, show us it's as safe to drink as water. And he put it down and he said, I'm not stupid, and he walked away. They know. Did you know that Monsanto doesn't serve GMO in their own company cafeterias? They know. So Attorney Brent Wisner, who is basically representing Dwayne Johnson, not The Rock Johnson, somebody else. But Johnson alleges Monsanto is to blame for the cancer that has been aggressively spreading throughout his entire body. And if he wins that lawsuit, there are a whole bunch of them lined up. Now, maybe Monsanto can convince the United States Congress to indemnify them, to say, oh, yes, we must protect Monsanto. It's essential to our nation's security, and we have to protect them the way that we protect the vaccine industry and the way that we have to protect the computer software industry. Because absent that, there are going to be a lot of lawsuits and a lot of people with cancer. It's a very expensive disease. Going to cost Monsanto a lot of money. All right, we're coming up here on a commercial. We'll be back with the last segment of our program today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, there's another article from 12160.info talking about the World Health Organization, because like the CDC, like they're champions of vaccines. And there's this author who's written articles basically saying that World Health Organization, like CDC, closes its eyes to vaccine adverse events. And apparently there's a growing number of doctors and even veterinarians who are demanding the World Health Organization be investigated for criminal charges linked to conflicts of interest. Some people are calling World Health Organization a boondoggle, a government project of little practical value funded to gain political favor. World Health Organization, nice name. They have arrogated to themselves the top position in the hierarchy of medical care. Don't listen to them, listen to us. We'll tell you what you need to have. It's all corrupted. It's all been corrupted. Now, here's an interesting story, and this is actually, there's been evidence of this surfacing for quite some time, where human tools are being found outside of Africa. In this case, the Shenzhen site in central China. And it basically indicates that there was human activity, tool using human activity there, like 1.3 million years ago. So that's a lot of history that we have never seen. And you have to wonder what civilizations may have arisen during that time and been completely obliterated by the ice ages. It's kind of interesting to think about. I have a hard time seeing humans remain in a state of primitivism for 1 million years and only become civilized in the last 8,000? I'm not buying that. I think it probably has happened over and over again, that there were earlier human civilizations that were just wiped out by the ice ages or volcanic eruption or tsunamis. We're not our civilizations are not imperishable. We don't really build things intended to last the way the Egyptians did. But we keep finding these older archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe. They're finding archaeological sites, geoglyphs. They have no idea who wrote them. They have no idea what civilization was there, only that there's an artifact remaining. And it's something rather interesting to think about, the idea that Neil Armstrong may not have been the first human being to walk on the moon. There could be a 1,000,000-year-old or a 200,000-year-old limb up there still. All right, we're going to take off here. There's the music. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everyone that you know. Word of mouth, email, direct contact, phone. Don't even waste your time on the corporate social media anymore. It's being turned into a giant pro-Hillary propaganda machine for the 2020 campaign. So we'll see you tomorrow, and aloha, America.